Here we are at lawhub.lsac.org, and we're in the LSAT prep sidebar menu. And at the top, we're going to click drill sets. We're going to scroll past the logical reasoning drill sets and go straight into reading comprehension drill set 4, and you'll click new drill set to get access to an additional 14 questions of reading comprehension in 2 passages. So we'll click on go to questions, and we are presented with the exact same interface as the official exam, with one notable exception. There is no passage only view in these drill sets. So you will have to do a little bit more scrolling, but everything else that we do normally, from our upfront read and highlighting through individually engaging the questions pertaining to the overall passage first, and then questions pertaining to individual pieces of subject matter, will be the exact same as what you'll encounter on test day and in the full LSAT prep test here at LawHub as well. So to engage with this passage up front, we're really going to ignore the question first. We're going to select a highlight tool instead, and we're going to read each individual paragraph of the passage, then stop after completing that paragraph and consider which is the single most important sentence capturing the main idea of the author for that paragraph, beginning with paragraph 1. So we read from the top. Videotape can be an expedient means of presenting witness testimony in court trials. An opponent of this practice, legal scholar S.J. Brakel, believes that videotape yields less reliable testimony or lessens jurors' ability to assess witnesses' credibility. Witnesses, Brakel thinks, are better aware of the stringent truthfulness requirement and the penalties for perjury when they are actually present in the courtroom. Also, Brakel claims videotape cannot capture in vivid detail the whole range of cues associated with testifying, paralinguistic cues such as tone of voice, cadence, and pitch, and nonverbal cues that include gestures as well as involuntary signs of nervousness. The fact that phenomena such as failure to maintain eye contact with the questioner, fidgeting, and an inappropriate tone of voice are considered in many cultures to signal deceit provides some anecdotal support for Brakel's claims. So, if we were thinking about this as a logical reasoning prompt, we hopefully can identify that this final sentence really is functioning as the conclusion of this paragraph. It is the position of the author as it pertains to Brakel's claims, that there is some anecdotal support. But since this is reading comprehension, we probably need to grab one additional sentence, understanding that we really want to maximize highlighting of 2 sentences for any individual paragraph. But here we need to know what Brakel's claims are. And this second paragraph, or second sentence of this paragraph, probably best provides that necessary context. And if we just read these 2 sentences together, an opponent of this practice, legal scholar S.J. Brakel, believes that videotape yields less reliable testimony or lessens jurors' ability to assess witnesses' credibility. The fact that phenomena such as failure to maintain eye contact with the questioner, fidgeting, and inappropriate tone of voice are considered in many cultures to signal deceit provides some anecdotal support for Brakel's claims, really does capture the overall main idea of the paragraph. However, if you want to be a little bit more specific, you can come over here, you can clean up and get rid of the an opponent of this practice, because we're clearly going to know that that practice is videotape testimony throughout the rest of this paragraph and furthermore the entire passage. So if you want to clean it up a little bit, you certainly can. And in this case, removing that introductory transition probably does make the narrative move a little bit more smoothly. But then we're going to scroll on down, and we'll just frame up the second highlight right now to make sure that we maintain the overall narrative as we consider paragraph 2 and identify its highlight sentence or sentences as well. So paragraph 2 continues. Brakel's critics argue that witnesses giving their testimony outside the courtroom in a lawyer's office or a recording studio are adequately aware, if given a formal reminder, of the penalties for perjury. The critics also suggest that even truthful witnesses might, under the stress of testifying in court, forget or involuntarily repress information. Now, this is a really tight little paragraph. And we remember from the previous highlight exercise that we were able to highlight 2 sentences. And in this case, I'd argue that each of these 2 sentences, even though they comprise the entire paragraph, are probably of equal importance. And we can just highlight these as what Brakel's critics are arguing as a contrast to the prior highlighted sentence. And if we just read through these briskly again, each of the highlights, we should see that the narrative maintains pretty well. So we've got the fact that phenomena such as failure to maintain eye contact with a questioner, fidgeting, and inappropriate tone of voice are considered in many cultures to signal deceit, provides some anecdotal support for Brakel's claims. Brakel's critics argue that witnesses giving their testimony outside the courtroom in a lawyer's office or a recording studio are adequately aware, if given a formal reminder, of the penalties for perjury. Critics also suggest that even truthful witnesses might, under the stress of testifying in court, forget or involuntarily repress information, is clearly continuing the narrative, and because there are only two sentences, you might highlight them both. But moving on, we're going to just scroll down and frame up as much as we can of the remainder of the next two paragraphs so that we minimize that scrolling up and down. Reading the next paragraph, Brakel's arguments against videotape testimony presume that witnesses' nonverbal and paralinguistic cues are a reliable basis for assessing veracity. But in court, when a great deal of both verbal and nonverbal information is available, it may be difficult for jurors to assimilate it all. This can trigger stereotyping strategies, judgments based on preconceptions rather than critical observation to simplify the task of assimilating information. Moreover, factors other than deceit, for example, a witness's anxiety about addressing a suspicious audience, can mimic the classic signs of deceit, thereby misleading jurors. So, again, we want to find whatever is the most subjective statement, and the word may should indicate that for us. So, we're going to just highlight, but in court, when a great deal of both verbal and nonverbal information is available, it may be difficult for jurors to assimilate it all. And we know that there are these subsequent issues with it. And I probably might highlight this sentence previously to continue the narrative rather than trying to get the details that come afterwards. The details that come afterwards are going to be just that, supporting evidence, supporting information. They aren't the main idea, and we want to stick to the big picture of the paragraphs. So we'll scroll on down and frame up the last two paragraphs in the end, and we're going to do the exact same exercise. Relative to live testimony, videotape presents jurors with less information about witnesses' nonverbal cues. Moreover, videotape witnesses, feeling less intimidated while testifying, are less likely to present false signals of deception. It is reasonable to conclude, then, that if the amount of nonverbal information jurors receive is essentially unrelated or even inversely related to the accuracy of their judgments, videotape testimony could be employed without reducing jurors' ability to detect deception. Hopefully, as we're working through these paragraphs, it becomes easier to identify what the main idea sentence is in each paragraph. And it's ultimately at your discretion whether you would like to add an additional sentence to bridge the gap in narrative here. But I would argue that really this final sentence of this penultimate paragraph is going to be most important and is by far the most important sentence and doesn't really need an additional highlighted sentence in this case to minimize the amount of rereading we're going to do. Next, we've got these criticisms of Brakel's views have some empirical support. In one study, interviewees were asked to mingle lies and truth in their responses. Subjects who watched and listened to the live interviews rather than to any recorded version had only a 58% accuracy rate in detecting deception, whereas subjects who merely read transcripts or heard audio tape recordings had a 77% accuracy rate. The researchers concluded that some visual cues may distract from other cues that more reliably indicate mendacity. Well, again, hopefully we recognize that the main idea sentence is this topic sentence of the final paragraph in this passage. These criticisms of Brakel's views have some empirical support. Again, if you want to grab one of these final two sentences just to build on that, you can. But really, again, everything that follows the topic sentence is in support of that statement, which in large part is kind of the author's main conclusion that the criticisms of Brakel's views are actually more valid than Brakel's views themselves. Now, as a final step before you actually engage the first question, in this case, a main point of the passage question task, you do want to reread all of your highlights to confirm that you've captured the overall narrative and have in your mind kind of an overall prediction from that read of the highlights for what the correct answer should do to answer the question of what the main point of the passage ultimately was. So, Reading from the top, we've got legal scholar S.J. Brakel believes that videotape yields less reliable testimony or lessens jurors' ability to assess witnesses' credibility. The fact that phenomena such as a failure to maintain eye contact with the questioner, fidgeting, and inappropriate tone of voice are considered in many cultures to signal deceit provides some anecdotal support for Brakel's claims. Brakel's critics, however, argue that witnesses giving their testimony outside the courtroom in a lawyer's office or recording studio adequately aware if given a formal reminder of the penalties for perjury. The critics also suggest that even truthful witnesses might, under the stress of testifying in court, forget or involuntarily repress information. Brakel's arguments against videotape testimony presume that witnesses' nonverbal and paralinguistic cues are a reliable basis for assessing veracity. But in court, when a great deal of both verbal and nonverbal information is available, it may be difficult for jurors to assimilate it all. It is reasonable to conclude, then, that if the amount of nonverbal information jurors receive is essentially unrelated or inversely related to the accuracy of their judgments, videotape testimony could be employed without reducing jurors' ability to detect deception. These criticisms of Brakel's views have some empirical support, and we should have an overall understanding that really this passage, if we're considering the main point, which we can now highlight as the task of question 1, is to present Brakel's views on videotape testimony and largely refute them, even though there might be some validity to the idea that live in person testimony, which is better than videotape testimony, has Brakel's view, even though the author is saying not necessarily. So we've got that in mind, this idea of we are looking for something that articulates, we talk about Brakel's views. We say that even though there might be some anecdotal support for them, largely the author's going the other direction. So, starting with choice A, empirical research supports the claim that removing the distractions of live testimony enhances the ability of jurors to detect mendacity. Well, the empirical research is at the very end, and it really wasn't the main idea. It's just kind of the final statement of support. So, this is a detail. Even if it's true, it's not the main idea. So, we can eliminate choice A for that reason. Then, choice B, a number of formidable objections have been raised to legal scholar S.J. Brakel's theories about the shortcomings of videotaped testimony. Well, yeah. And beware of thinking that a number of formidable objections is extreme. In this case, the author is pretty clearly against Brakel's position on videotape testimony. And you can proactively, hopefully, select B at this point, which will allow us to go a little bit more briskly through choices C, D, and E as we scroll down intentionally to see the remaining answer choices. So, continuing on for the purposes of this video, we're going to identify explicit reasons to eliminate the rest of the choices, starting with C. Legal scholar S.J. Brakel's contention that witnesses who testify in court are less likely to perjure themselves has been thrown into doubt by recent research. Well, we're not concerned primarily with the recent research. We can just focus on that specific issue, not dive into this too deeply, knowing that it wasn't mainly about the recent research from the first answer choices reason to eliminate. We can eliminate C for the same reason. Then choice D, legal scholar S.J. Brakel's hypothesis about the response of jurors to videotape testimony has been rejected by researchers who have studied the use of this technology. Well, it hasn't been outright rejected, and the author is certainly not outright rejecting Brakel's views. Author is simply saying that the criticisms have some support. So D is extreme for that phrasing, has been rejected, and we can eliminate that hopefully almost immediately. And lastly, choice E, critics of legal scholar S.J. Brakel have assembled evidence supporting the view that videotape testimony is indistinguishable from live courtroom testimony. Well, again, indistinguishable is extreme, which leaves us with our correct answer of B. And all of the work that you just did with your upfront main idea highlights is going to inform your process and hopefully expedite evaluation for the subsequent 7 questions to come. Thank you for watching this explanation video of a practice problem of reading comprehension drill set number 4 over at lawhub.lsac.org. If you enjoyed the tips it contained, please consider liking the video or subscribing to our channel to be alerted when new explanation videos are produced by my guru. Also, take a look at the description below because you'll find additional links to resources from my guru, including a set of full practice prep test explanations that are similar to what you just watched. And remember, as you prepare for the LSAT, it's supposed to be hard.